Hello, welcome to the second part of Lecture 2, Materials and Techniques. In this lecture, we will be covering three-dimensional or 3D media, especially for techniques of sculpture and architecture. We will cover a lot of important terminology, so feel free to pause this video as needed to take notes. Our first technique for 3D media is sculpture. Sculpture are objects that can be made in a variety of ways and can come in all sorts of materials and sizes. Sculpture can often portray similar subject matter and qualities as the drawings, paintings, and prints we saw in the previous lecture video, but they contain real weight and volume and occupy a more tangible space in our physical world. There are two types of sculpture that we are going to look at in more depth here. One is called freestanding, which refers to sculpture that is meant to be seen from multiple angles. This can also be called sculpture in the round. The other type is called relief, which refers to sculpture that is meant to be seen from only one angle. The imagery is usually carved or etched from the surface material. If a sculpture is carved in high relief, then it is highly raised from the surface to project away from it, whereas a sculpture done in low relief, also called bas-relief, is barely etched out of the surface and only slightly raised from it. Let's start with a closer look at freestanding sculpture. Freestanding sculptures can be viewed from all angles, and thus they are often placed in locations that allow our viewers to experience several vantage points. In this example from the sculptor Giambologna, we can see how the scene of these figures is meant to be viewed from a variety of angles. There are details in different spots, all carved out of the marble to encourage us to move around the sculpture, taking in the angles, shapes, contours, gestures, and expressions of the individual figures to help convey the emotional intensity and pain of the moment. In contrast, bas-relief and high-relief sculptures do not encourage viewers to move around the work, but rather to experience the visual qualities from one vantage point. For example, in this scene of the dying lioness, the viewer maintains a frontal vantage point from which to take in the details of the animal as it suffers from multiple arrow wounds. Since the lioness is only lightly etched out of the surface of the limestone, it is in bas-relief, or low relief. As a relief image originally on the wall of an Assyrian palace in ancient Mesopotamia, the viewer would have seen this image as part of a larger hunting scene, in which the Assyrian king living inside the palace structure demonstrates his prowess as a hunter and his power over the natural world. In contrast, this sculpted memorial is done in high relief, as the elements of the scene project outward from the background support of marble towards the physical space of the viewer. As the image takes on more physical space, it also takes on a more realistic quality despite the mythological and allegorical content with the lion and the angels surrounding the deceased king. Now that we've seen examples of two types of sculpture, relief and freestanding, it's important to know some of the terms associated with its production. Methods of sculpture can either remove material, which is called subtractive, or combine material together, which is called additive. For instance, carving is considered a type of subtractive method of sculpture because it involves the removal of material to create a desired image. In this example, we see before us the sculpture known as Colossal Head number 10, which has been carved from an enormous boulder of basalt, a kind of volcanic rock. To produce this work, parts of the basalt were removed and carved away, then smoothed and chiseled to create the specific details. Michelangelo left behind many examples of unfinished sculptures, so here we can see what this carving method actually entailed. Similar to the colossal head, this figure is being carved out of the large stone slab by having layers removed, then the remaining parts polished, chiseled, and sculpted to create the human body. Eventually, Michelangelo created highly polished and extremely detailed sculptures from this carving process. It's no surprise this figure of Moses took years to carve and complete to perfection. Modeling is considered a type of additive method of sculpture because materials are combined in the production process until the desired image is attained. Usually, materials that are lighter and more malleable are used for modeling methods. Clay is a popular material for sculptors to use in the modeling process. When clay is modeled into a sculptural design, then fired or baked at a high temperature, it solidifies and is called terracotta. Here we see a terracotta sarcophagus that was created by adding and sculpting clay by the artist, likely to portray portraits of the deceased buried within the sarcophagus itself. Unlike carving or modeling, casting involves several more steps to produce a work of freestanding sculpture. In the casting process, an artist will create a model of what they want the sculpture to look like, sometimes out of clay or wax, a material that is flexible and easy to manipulate. Then a mold is created by layering more material around the model before taking the mold away and removing a thin layer off of the original model. Then the mold is replaced around the original model again, with a small gap now in between. Inside the gap, a very hot casting liquid is poured to fill it in. After it cools and hardens, the mold is removed and the hard cast is created. The technique called lost wax casting is how the bronze sculptures since the times of ancient Greece have been created. Here we have an example of one of the Riace warriors, bronze sculptures of soldiers from ancient Greece that were found submerged in the sea off the coast of Riace, a modern-day Italy. These sculptures likely originally had wax models, which melted during the molten hot casting process. So now only the hardened and cooled bronze sculpture remains. Now that we've had a chance to discuss sculpture, we're going to look at another method of three-dimensional construction, architecture. Predominantly, natural materials found in the physical world around us have been preferred materials when creating monumental works of architecture for religious and civic use. Stone, wood, clay, or mud brick have been popular materials and have surprisingly survived over the many centuries of human development. One of the most impressive remnants of architectural structures from the ancient world are the Great Pyramids at Giza, which are made of stone bricks and modeled into pyramid mounds that rise above the dry desert sands of Egypt. Though nowadays we see skyscrapers made of glass and steel, historians and architects alike still marvel at the incredible construction methods used to build the Great Pyramids that have allowed them to survive nearly 4,000 years. There are some important terms you'll need to know and use to describe architectural works and monuments. The three most important terms for this class will be arch, vault, and dome. Arches are extremely important utilitarian and aesthetic components to architecture. They are rounded structures at the top that come downwards to column supports. They typically push weight or load out and down to allow for tiers and layers to rise upward. In this Roman-era aqueduct from France, arches are used to lessen the total weight of the structure to prevent collapse, instead of requiring massive amounts of brick and stone to fill thick walls, while still allowing for a surprising amount of height to be able to cross the waterway. Here we have an example of a vault, which is essentially an extended arch. It mimics the shape of an arch, but is a longer structure, often used to create a central walkway that can allow access underneath it. For instance, the nave, the central long interior section of the church, is essentially a long vault. In the Church of Saint Foy, pictured here, we can see how the arch is used to support the structure on the sides of the nave, and the nave itself is one very tall vault with several places for the weight to be distributed down the columns to lighten the load. When arches and vaults are used to create an architectural structure, the lightened structural load allows for a dome to be placed at the top. Since the weight of the dome roof is equally distributed outward and downward along the arches and columns, it will not collapse from the center, since there is little weight there. The triangular sections connecting the arches to the dome in this graphic are called pendentives, and they help direct the weight of the dome down into the columns at the base of the arches. One of the most impressive examples of a dome hovering above large arches is found in the Hagia Sophia, a massive structure built during the Byzantine Empire in what is now Istanbul. The Hagia Sophia was originally a large Christian church, then later a Muslim mosque, and is now a state-run museum. It is a monument to the engineering and architectural vision of its time. Its enormous arches support the dome and allow for ample space for decoration, and the pendentives hold the dome far above the spectators down below. Together, these forms create an awe-inspiring experience for any viewer. This concludes Part 2, Three-Dimensional or 3D Media, of Lecture 2, Materials and Techniques.